My name is Manon Campo, I am 28, and I knew walking into my father's house that Christmas night that the evening would not be about warmth or family. It would be about the same old game, the sneers, the little digs that cut deeper than knives. I had braced myself during the long drive through the snow, telling myself I was no longer the girl who used to shrink under their laughter. I carried something they did not know, something that could change everything. Still, when the moment came, their cruelty was sharper than I expected. Have you ever sat at a table where every smile felt like a blade turned your way? Where your own blood tried to strip you of your worth in front of strangers? Stay with me, because that night I chose not to stay silent. And what followed turned our family upside down. The first thing I remember about that Christmas night was the way the snow clung to my boots as I walked up the stone steps to my father's house in Omaha. The place looked like something out of a glossy magazine, every window lined with golden lights, every shrub wrapped tight in glittering garlands. My breath puffed in front of me in little clouds as I adjusted my coat. I had driven in from Iowa that afternoon, my truck smelling faintly of the hay I had hauled that morning. No matter how many times I scrubbed, the scent of the farm came with me. I knew it, and I knew they would smell it too. That was the whole point of tonight. Inside, warmth and noise spilled into the hallway, laughter, clinking glasses, the soft hum of a piano playing in the background. I hung my coat in the foyer, shook the cold from my hair, and walked toward the dining room. The long table gleamed under the chandelier, silverware perfectly placed, glasses sparkling like crystal prisms. My father, Richard, sat at the head, a man in his mid-50s with a build still broad from years of golf and business lunches. He raised his glass when he saw me and smirked. "Here comes the farm girl," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice carried that mocking edge he had perfected over the years. "You look like you still smell of the barn. Who could ever want you like that?" My stomach tightened, but I kept my step steady. Clarissa, my sister, perched elegantly on his right. She was 31 now, draped in a red dress that shimmered against the candlelight, her manicured fingers tapping a rhythm against her wine glass. She tilted her head, wrinkling her nose in exaggerated disgust. "She smells like manure," she said, and everyone around her chuckled. Not exactly family material. The laughter rippled down the table. Uncles leaned back, shaking their heads with grins. Cousins smirked into their plates. My chest burned, but my face stayed neutral. I had rehearsed this in my mind 100 times. I knew this moment would come, that they would strike first, and I had promised myself I would let them laugh. Let them expose their cruelty for everyone in the room to see. Then, when the time came, I would answer. I slid into my seat at the far end of the table. The linen napkin felt stiff in my hands, the smell of roasted turkey and glazed ham rising from the platters between us. For a moment, I closed my eyes, inhaling the rich aroma. It reminded me of the Christmas dinners I used to share with my grandparents in Iowa before they passed, before this family fractured into something cruel and hollow. Back then, the table had been filled with warmth, not venom. My grandmother's hands flour-dusted, my grandfather's laugh echoing across the kitchen as he carved the meat. Those memories lived inside me, steadying me against the storm. "You could have changed," my father said, swirling the wine in his glass. "You could have gone to college, gotten a real job. Instead, you stayed in the dirt. 30 years old and nothing to show for it but calloused hands and a rusty truck." I was 28, but correcting him felt pointless. His words were not about truth, they were about power. He leaned back in his chair, his gold watch catching the light, daring me to rise to his bait. Clarissa leaned closer to him, her diamond earrings flashing as she whispered something that drew another round of laughter from the table. My cheeks grew warm, but I sat still, folding my hands together until the knuckles ached. Across the table, Aunt Margaret shifted uncomfortably. She was nearly 60, a retired teacher with a sharp gaze that often saw more than she admitted. Her lips pressed tight, but she said nothing, not yet. She would wait as I was waiting. My father's voice boomed again, dragging attention back to me. "Look at you sitting here like you belong at this table. You are too filthy to be loved. A man would have to be insane to take you." The words hit like a lash, cruel and deliberate. The chuckles around the table turned sharper, more cutting, as if his approval gave them license. Inside, I felt a familiar flicker of shame, the kind that had haunted me since I was a teenager. I had tried to scrub it away with soap and perfume, tried to bury it under long hours of labor in the fields, but it always returned when I faced them. Yet tonight, under the sting of their laughter, I found something else rising in me, not shame but resolve. My hand brushed against the edge of my coat, draped on the chair beside me. I could feel the thick folder tucked inside, the papers that would change everything. "Not yet," I whispered inside my head. "Let them show their true selves first." Clarissa raised her glass toward me, her smile thin and poisonous. To my sister, who still thinks mucking out stalls counts as a career. The toast drew another wave of brittle laughter. I lifted my glass of water slowly, my face calm, my eyes locked on hers. "Cheers," I said, my voice flat, and drank. The water was cool against my tongue, grounding me in the moment. The food arrived, dishes passed down the table, laughter bubbling as if nothing cruel had just been said. I picked at the turkey on my plate, my fork scraping against porcelain. Every sound seemed amplified, every glance at me sharpened like a knife. My father leaned toward a cousin, his voice just loud enough for me to catch. "She thinks she's one of us, but she never was, never will be." I breathed in slowly, tasting the salt of the ham, the sweetness of cranberry sauce. The folder in my coat seemed to hum with quiet power. I thought of the snow outside blanketing the fields back home, of the barns standing steady under the winter sky. I thought of my grandparents' hands guiding mine when I was small, their voices reminding me that hard work was honor, that the land was sacred. They had seen what my father had become, and they had made their choice. They had trusted me. Tonight I would honor that trust. The conversation swirled around me, laughter rising, then dipping, like waves in a storm. I let it wash over me, my pulse steadying, my mind sharpening. This was only the beginning. They thought they had humiliated me. They thought I was powerless. They had no idea what was coming. The candlelight flickered, throwing long shadows across the table. I lifted another bite of turkey to my mouth, chewing slowly, my eyes fixed on my father at the head of the table. His smirk widened, convinced he had broken me. If only he knew how wrong he was. And in that quiet moment, with laughter still echoing around me, I felt the shift inside myself. Tonight was the last night they would ever laugh at me. I set my fork down, folded my hands, and waited. The voices around me blurred, their words melting into the background hum of a room too full of smugness and wine. My eyes drifted to the window where the snow kept falling, each flake landing silent and steady, just like the years I had carried their judgment without protest. The sight pulled me back away from the table, into a memory that had shaped me more than any cruel remark ever could. I was 10 years old again, my boots sinking into fresh Iowa mud as my grandfather Samuel led me across the pasture. His steps were slower then, the weight of his 70 years pressing on his shoulders, but his hand was strong around mine. The cows shifted lazily near the fence line, their warm breath puffing against the cold morning air. My grandmother Evelyn stood at the porch, her apron fluttering in the breeze as she called out for us to come back for breakfast. I can still hear the way her voice carried across the fields, light and full of love. Grandpa stopped near the barn and crouched low, his weathered face close to mine. "Manon," he said, "this land is more than dirt. It is blood and bones, sweat and prayer. It is everything our name stands for." His words pressed into me like a promise. I looked up at him, at the lines carved deep into his face, and nodded even though I could not fully grasp what he meant at that age. He smiled then, handing me the old brass key to the barn, its edges cool and heavy in my palm. "One day this will be yours to keep. Hold on to it no matter what." That morning we had walked back toward the house, and Grandma had pulled me into her flour-dusted arms. She smelled of cinnamon and soap, her cheek soft against mine. She pressed a biscuit into my hand before shooing me toward the table. "Sit down, sweetheart, eat while it is hot." The memory of that warmth lingers in me even now, sharper than the cold words my father had just spat across the Christmas table. Years passed, and I grew into the rhythm of the farm, waking before dawn, feeding the animals, mending fences. My hands toughened, my back strengthened, and I learned the quiet language of the land. Grandpa's voice was always there in my head, reminding me that the earth gave back what you poured into it. When I turned 18, he took me aside one evening, the sun setting red over the cornfields. He pulled out a thick envelope, stamped and official, and placed it in my hands. "Keep this safe," he said, his eyes serious. "It is our legacy, and one day it will protect you when the world turns cruel." I did not open it then. I tucked it away, not knowing the full weight of what it held. But 3 years later, in a small courthouse in Douglas County, I sat between my grandparents as they signed documents that would tie the future of the farm to me. They wanted to ensure that their work, their bloodline, and their land would not be squandered. The trust fund was established, $3 million in value, bound to the condition that the farm remain in the hands of someone who worked it with their own labor for 10 years. I was 21 then, wide-eyed and unsure, but I nodded when they asked if I was ready. I promised I would honor them. The years that followed tested that promise. Storms flattened fields, bills piled up, and loneliness dug at my heart. My father never offered help. He would visit occasionally, not to lend a hand, but to sneer at the chipped paint on the barn or the rust on the tractor. Clarissa never came at all. She had escaped to Chicago, living in sleek apartments, parading her success on social media. I kept working every day, even when my body ached and the numbers in my checkbook barely added up. There were nights I cried into my pillow, wondering if I was foolish to hold on so tightly. Yet every dawn I rose again, tied my boots, and went out into the fields. That brass key never left my dresser drawer, a reminder of the vow I had made. The memory shifted again to the winter my grandmother passed. I was 23, standing in the small kitchen as the hospice nurse quietly packed her things. Grandpa sat at the table silent, his eyes hollow. He looked at me, then his voice trembling. "Promise me, Manon, do not let your father sell it. Promise me." I held his hand, tears burning down my cheeks, and I promised again. 2 years later, he was gone too, leaving me alone with the farm and the trust they had created. That was when I began to understand the full scope of what they had done. They had seen the weakness in their son, my father, and they had placed their faith in me instead. I pulled myself back to the present, the chatter of the dining room pulling me out of the past. My father was laughing again, his glass raised as he boasted about his latest deal. My sister leaned close, her voice sharp as she whispered something that made him chuckle louder. They thought they were untouchable. They thought the farm was already theirs to dispose of, another asset to pad their empire. They had no idea that every cruel word only made me stronger. Aunt Margaret's eyes flicked toward me, her brow furrowed. I wondered if she remembered those days on the farm, if she had seen how my grandparents had placed their trust in me. She looked as though she wanted to speak, but then she glanced at Richard and fell silent. Fear still held her back, but I sensed the shift. She knew something was coming. Maybe she was waiting for me to act. The clink of silverware filled the air as plates were passed again. I picked at my food, the memories of my grandparents wrapping around me like a shield. I could almost hear my grandmother's laugh, smell the cinnamon biscuits baking in her oven. I could almost feel my grandfather's steady hand on my shoulder. Their voices whispered inside me, steady and clear. "Hold on, wait, the moment will come." My father leaned back, his voice rising above the murmur. "Some people cling to dirt because they have nothing else," he said, his eyes cutting toward me. "They mistake sweat for success." The room erupted with laughter, again brittle and cruel. My hand tightened around my glass, but my voice remained still. Let them laugh. I had promised myself I would let them. The snow outside pressed against the windows, the world beyond the glass cold and quiet. Inside, the air was hot with wine and arrogance. I sat in the eye of it, calm, steady, holding the weight of my memories close. Every insult, every sneer, only brought me closer to the moment when their laughter would die in their throats. And as I looked at my father, so sure of his power, I felt the ghost of my grandfather's hand again. The key was still in my drawer at home, the trust documents safe, the promise intact. They had mocked me as filthy, as unworthy, but they had no idea that the very dirt they despised had already crowned me, the heir. I leaned back in my chair, the candlelight flickering across my face. Let them drink, let them boast. Their downfall was already written, and I carried it with me, tucked safely inside the folder at my side. The night was only beginning. I reached for my napkin and laid it gently on the table, steadying my breath while the noise of the room swelled again. My father launched into another story about a development in Cedar Rapids, boasting about investors, about leverage, about how real money was made by smart men who knew how to handle deals. His voice filled the space smooth and loud, the way it always had when he wanted to remind everyone that he was the center of gravity. I kept my eyes on him, careful, quiet, letting him believe I was still the same silent daughter who never spoke back. Clarissa leaned in closer to him, her red lipstick shining in the candlelight. She whispered something that made him throw his head back with laughter, a booming sound that echoed around the dining room. For a moment, the other guests at neighboring tables looked over curious, and then turned back to their meals. To them, we were just another family sharing holiday cheer. They could not hear the sharp edges of my father's words, or the poison woven into my sister's smile. I knew better than to speak too soon. Timing mattered. Grandpa had drilled that into me long before I understood why. He used to say a farmer's patience was his greatest tool, because planting too early or too late ruined the harvest. The same truth held here. I let the insults pile, let their arrogance bloom. Because the higher they climbed on their own laughter, the harder they would fall when the ground gave way. My aunt shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Margaret was never cruel, but she had always been too timid to challenge my father. Tonight, her eyes darted between him and me, her fork barely touching her plate. She was watching, waiting, as though she sensed the current changing beneath the surface. I lifted my water glass and took a slow sip. My sister smirked and spoke louder, her voice sharp enough for the table to hear. "I suppose some people will always reek of barns and manure no matter how much they scrub." She set her glass down with a clink, her earrings swinging as she turned to the others. That smell never leaves you. It is why she will never belong here. My father chuckled, nodding in approval. That is exactly right. It is not about the work. It is about the polish. Some folks are born rough and stay that way. Their laughter roared again, bouncing off the polished wood and the sparkling lights above us. I sat still, but inside I felt a different kind of heat. Not the sting of shame, not anymore. I had lived through years of that. What burned now was something steadier, a quiet certainty that their cruelty was writing its own ending. The waiter appeared at my side, setting down another round of drinks. His hand lingered for a moment on the stem of my glass, his eyes meeting mine with the faintest nod. He knew. He had seen the papers when the restaurant nearly folded 3 years earlier. He knew who had stepped in, who had saved this place. He walked away without a word, but the look was enough. I was not as invisible as my father believed. The conversation turned toward business again, my father's favorite topic. Clarissa leaned forward, her voice dripping with pride. Dad, tell them about the new plan for the farm. The words sliced into me sharp and deliberate. My father's eyes glinted as he leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his chest. Ah, yes, the farm. That land is wasted now. Nothing but mud and old fences. But I have been speaking with a company out of Des Moines. They are eager to buy it for development. He paused, savoring the way the words landed. We could have a deal signed by spring. 30 acres turned into housing tracts, maybe even a shopping center. Now that is progress. My stomach tightened. The farm, my grandparents' land, the place I had sworn to protect. They were planning to sell it, to pave over the fields where I had spent my childhood, where my grandparents had poured every ounce of themselves. And worse, they were speaking of it as though it already belonged to them, as though my years of labor meant nothing. I looked at my father, his smug grin, his glass swirling in his hand. He did not know the truth. He thought the land was his to trade his to leverage. He had no idea that the trust had already stripped him of that power. He had no idea that the papers I carried in my bag tonight were strong enough to silence him for good. Clarissa leaned back in her chair, her eyes bright with mockery. I always told you, Dad, she would waste her life there. Now at least it can serve some purpose. Maybe her dirt can turn into something valuable after all. The laughter bubbled again, sharp and cruel, but I no longer felt the sting. I felt only the steady pulse of the secret I carried. Margaret set her fork down with a soft clink, her voice low but firm. Richard, maybe we should slow down. That land has been in the family for generations. Her words hung in the air, fragile, daring. My father turned to her, his face tightening. Margaret, do not be sentimental. Land is money, that is all. The sooner you learn that, the better. She flinched at his tone and fell silent, but her eyes met mine for just a second, and I saw the flicker of hope there. She wanted me to fight. I pressed my hand against my lap, steadying the weight of the folder hidden in my bag. Inside were the documents, the signatures, the trust that my grandparents had built. I had never flaunted them, never wanted to use them as a weapon. But hearing my father speak so carelessly, hearing Clarissa's glee, I knew the time was near. They thought they had control. They thought I was powerless. They were wrong. My father raised his glass again, his voice booming. To progress, to profit, to leave behind what no longer serves. His words drew another round of cheers from the table. I lifted my glass too, though my lips barely touched the rim. Progress, he called it. I called it betrayal. I let the silence of my own toast speak louder than any words could. The room blurred around me as my thoughts raced back to the night before, when I had sat at my desk with the folder open, the lamp casting a yellow glow on the papers. My attorney Jacob had walked me through every clause, every condition. His voice had been calm, steady, but the words were a thunderclap in my ears. You hold the rights, Manon. Not your father, not your sister, only you. This trust cannot be broken. They will try, but the law is on your side. He had paused, looking at me over his glasses. The question is whether you are ready to use it. I had not answered then. I had only stared at the paper, my grandparents' signatures steady and firm at the bottom, their handwriting a ghost reaching across the years. Tonight, as my father laughed about selling the farm, I finally understood. I was ready. The plates were cleared, dessert menus handed out, the clatter of silverware filling the silence between us. My father leaned back again, smugness dripping from every movement. Clarissa adjusted her bracelet, her eyes gleaming as she whispered something about vacation homes and new cars. Their world was already built on the foundation of a deal that would never exist. I sat in the quiet of my own certainty, the folder heavy in my bag, the promise of my grandparents pulsing in my chest. The night was still theirs for now, but the dawn would belong to me. And as I set the cup back on the saucer, I knew that the night would not end the way they imagined. The sound of forks clinking faded, and for a moment the room felt too quiet, like the hush before a storm. My father leaned toward Clarissa, his voice low but full of glee. I have already given my word to the developers. They will drop the contract in January. Once it is signed, the farm is gone. And so is her stubborn little act of playing farmer. I breathed in slowly, steadying myself, the words sinking into me like stones. Clarissa laughed softly, twirling her hair with her fingers, her eyes shining. That land is wasted on her anyway. She probably thinks sweat and manure can pay bills. Dad, you are right. Selling it is the smartest thing we have ever done. My chest tightened, but not with defeat. It was hardened like iron. I thought of Jacob again, his calm voice echoing from our last meeting. Remember this, Manon. A promise from your father means nothing if the law is not on his side. And the law is not. He cannot touch the land without you. The trust binds it to you. He paused, his eyes locking with mine. But if they are planning deals, you need proof of their intent. Keep your ears open tonight. My ears were open now, and their arrogance poured out like spilled wine. My father straightened, waving his hand as if he were already sealing the deal. The county will approve the zoning in no time. Housing tracts, shopping centers, maybe even a hotel. By summer, we will have broken ground. His voice carried across the table, full of triumph. I pressed my hand against the folder in my bag, hidden under my chair. Inside, the papers waited like a loaded gun. My grandparents' signatures, the trust documents, the clause that made everything he just boasted about impossible. I felt the weight of it solid and certain, while his words turned to dust in the air. Margaret shifted again, her face pale, her fork untouched. She spoke quietly, almost trembling. Richard, are you sure this is wise? Selling the farm is not just business. It is family history. It is who we are. My father snapped his gaze toward her, his voice sharp as glass. Family history does not pay for condos and cars, Margaret. Do not start preaching. He turned back to Clarissa, ignoring his sister completely. Clarissa smirked, her chin lifted. Dad, you are brilliant. And when it is done, she will finally have to accept that she does not belong. She shot me a look, her smile cutting. You should start packing now, little sister. Maybe someone will hire you to muck stables when this is over. The words washed over me, but instead of anger, I felt calm. She did not know. She had no idea. Their scheme was already collapsing under its own weight. I picked up my fork, cutting a small bite of pie, my movements slow and deliberate. My silence unnerved her. I could see it in the way her smile faltered for just a second. My father leaned back, his voice booming again. By February, it will all be finalized. The developers promised us triple what the land is worth. That is what it means to know how the world works. He laughed, and Clarissa joined him, their voices filling the space. I looked at him steadily, my voice quiet but clear. You are celebrating too early. The words slipped out before I could stop them. His laughter faltered, his eyes narrowing. What did you say? I set my fork down, folding my hands in my lap. Nothing. Just thinking about timing. He studied me, suspicion flickering in his gaze, but then he dismissed it with a shake of his head. He thought I was powerless, the same girl who had stayed silent for years. He had no idea that I was holding the key to unravel everything he had just promised. Clarissa rolled her eyes, leaning back in her chair. Ignore her, Dad. She is just bitter. She cannot stand that we are moving forward while she is stuck in the mud. The waiter reappeared, pouring more coffee, his eyes meeting mine once again. A small nod, subtle but certain. I held his gaze for half a second, drawing strength from the quiet acknowledgement. Someone knew, someone saw. The hum of conversation rose around us as the restaurant filled with the sound of clinking glasses and muffled laughter from other tables. But at our table, the air was sharp, electric. I felt the weight of every eye, every word, every memory pressing in on me. My father lifted his glass again, his voice carrying. To deals made and fortunes secured, to leaving behind what holds us down. His eyes flicked to me, daring me to respond. I raised my glass too, but my lips did not touch the rim. The bitterness of coffee still lingered, reminding me that this night was far from over. Clarissa leaned closer to him, her voice low but triumphant. She will not fight us, Dad. She never does. My father nodded, his smile spreading. That is right. She will stay quiet like always, but not tonight. The snow pressed harder against the windows, thick and relentless, a storm gathering force. Inside, the candles flickered, casting shadows across the table. My father and sister laughed again, their voices rising above the hum of the restaurant. I sat in the center, silent, steady, the folder heavy at my side. They believed the game was already won, but they were wrong. And as I glanced at Margaret, her eyes pleading silently with mine, I knew the moment was coming. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one about to break in here. They were wrong. The words repeated in my chest like the beat of a drum, steady and certain. My father tipped his glass again, smirking as if the farm was already bulldozed into dust. Clarissa leaned back with her smug smile, twirling her bracelet as if she could already feel the wealth in her hands. The air was thick, not with holiday cheer, but with arrogance so heavy it nearly smothered me. The waiter cleared the dessert plates, and I caught the quick glance he gave me, the same one he had given all night. A silent reminder that I was not invisible, that my strength had witnesses. I folded my napkin, carefully smoothing its edges against the table. My father noticed and let out a laugh. Look at her, too polite to even defend herself. That is why she will always lose. Clarissa chuckled, echoing him. She is pathetic, Dad. She hides behind silence because she has nothing to say. She will never matter. Her voice was syrupy and cruel, sweetened for the table but sharpened just for me. I lifted my gaze and let it rest on hers, steady and unflinching. For the first time that night, her smirk wavered. Margaret shifted in her seat, her face pale. "Richard, stop," she whispered, but her voice trembled too much to cut through. He ignored her, of course, raising his voice louder. "This is how the world works, Manon. Winners take what they want. Losers cling to scraps." He leaned back, arms wide, as if he were already receiving applause. "The land is mine, the deals are mine, and you are nothing but a tenant in my shadow." The words landed like a hammer against the table. Other diners looked over now, sensing the sharpness in his tone. The hum of conversation dimmed as people leaned just close enough to catch the edges of the storm brewing. I thought again of Jacob, his calm eyes steady across the desk. He had said, "Once you choose to fight, do not hesitate. They will press every weak spot they know. But you have something stronger than they do. You have truth." My father leaned forward suddenly, his eyes narrowing, his voice dropping into a harsh whisper. "You think you can keep holding that place, but you cannot. I have the county wrapped around my finger." He smirked, letting the words roll slowly. "One word from me, and you will be forced off that land before spring." It was a bluff. I knew it the way I knew the back of my hand. But he believed it, and that belief gave him power. I let the silence hang for a moment, watching the satisfaction spread across his face. Then I reached down and touched the folder under my chair, the edges of the paper sharp against my fingertips. I straightened, meeting his eyes. "That land is not yours to sell." My voice was steady, louder than I intended. The table froze. Clarissa's glass paused halfway to her lips. Margaret stared at me, her mouth open. My father laughed, a deep, mocking sound that carried across the room. "Not mine." He leaned closer, his eyes gleaming. "Everything you touch is mine." I pulled the folder into my lap, running my hand over the smooth cover. "Not this, not tonight." My heart pounded so hard I thought the others could hear it. Clarissa slammed her glass down, leaning across the table. "Stop pretending, Manon. You cannot even pay your bills." "You think you can stop us?" Her face twisted with triumph. "You have nothing." Her words stung, but behind the sting was fire. Nothing. I had worked every inch of that land with my hands. I had stood through storms and droughts. I had held on when no one else believed. And in my bag was proof that her words were lies. The tension grew so thick you could feel it pressing against your skin. Other diners had fallen silent now, forks hovering midair, heads turning. Even the waitstaff moved slower, their eyes flicking toward us. The Christmas music playing softly overhead seemed out of place, almost mocking. Margaret's voice cracked as she spoke. "Clarissa, stop, please." She reached for her wine, her hand trembling so badly it rattled against the glass. But my father cut her off with a bark of laughter. "Let her talk, Margaret. Let her embarrass herself." I opened the folder just slightly, the rustle of paper soft but deliberate. Clarissa's eyes darted down her brows, knitting. "What is that?" she asked sharply, her voice tinged with unease. My father leaned forward, squinting. "What are you playing at?" I looked at both of them, my voice calm. "You think I am weak because I stayed quiet. You think silence means defeat. But you never asked why I stayed." My father smirked, though his eyes flickered for the first time. "Because you had no choice. You needed me." His confidence wrapped around him like a shield, but I saw the crack forming. I closed the folder again, sliding it back onto my lap. Not yet. Not here. The final blow would land when the time was right, not in a burst of emotion, but with precision. Still the seed of doubt was planted. Clarissa shifted in her chair, frowning. Margaret's gaze flicked between us, her eyes wide. I took a slow sip of water, letting the glass linger against my lips. Around us, the air buzzed, the storm tightening its grip. My father chuckled again, but it was shorter now, forced. "You have nothing," he repeated, but quieter this time, as if trying to convince himself. The snow outside pressed harder against the windows, wind howling faintly beyond the glass. Inside, the warmth of the room felt suffocating, heavy with tension. Clarissa reached for her wine again, her hand shaking just slightly. I set my glass down and leaned forward, my voice just loud enough for only the table to hear. "You are celebrating a deal you cannot make. You are laughing at a game you already lost." Clarissa's mouth opened to fire back, but no words came. My father's smirk froze, his jaw tightening. Margaret's eyes welled, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak, but could not find the courage. The waiter passed by again, his steps slowing, his eyes catching mine one more time. This time he did not look away quickly. He knew something was coming, everyone did. The night was shifting, tilting toward the inevitable. And as I straightened in my chair, the folder steady in my lap, I felt the tide turn in my favor. The storm had only just begun. My father's laugh had dried in his throat, leaving a thin smirk that no longer reached his eyes. Clarissa toyed with her bracelet, spinning it around her wrist, her lips pressed into a line that looked too tight to be comfortable. Margaret sat frozen, the napkin crumpled in her lap, her fingers twisting it over and over as if she could wring the tension from the room. The waiter returned, placing fresh cups of coffee on the table, his movements careful, deliberate. He leaned slightly toward me, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Some storms are worth standing in," he murmured before walking away. My heart jolted at his words, simple but weighted. I looked up and caught his eyes for a moment before he disappeared into the kitchen. He knew. He had known for years. Clarissa shifted in her chair, breaking the silence. "Enough of this drama. Dad, she is bluffing. She always does. She cannot even afford to fix the roof on that barn, let alone fight us." Her words were sharp, but her voice cracked at the end. My father slammed his palm against the table, silverware rattling. "Then prove it. Show us what you think you have." His voice cut across the room, drawing the attention of diners at the nearby tables. The quiet buzz of conversation dimmed again, the storm at our table pulling every gaze toward us. I held his stare, my fingers brushing the folder in my lap. The weight of the papers was steady grounding. I could end it right now. I could tear through his arrogance with a single motion. But before I could speak, a new voice rose behind me. "That farm does not belong to you, Richard." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through the room. I turned and saw Ronan standing just a few feet away, his apron dusted with flour, his hands steady at his sides. His eyes were fixed on my father, unflinching. "I kept the place running after your deals nearly sank it 3 years ago," he said, his voice calm but carrying. "And I know exactly who stepped in to save us." He turned his gaze to me, nodding once. She did. A murmur spread through the restaurant as diners leaned closer, whispering. Clarissa's mouth dropped open, her face pale. My father's smirk shattered his jaw, clenching. "Sit down, Ronan," he snapped, his voice shaking with fury. "This is a family business." Ronan did not move. "Family business," he repeated, his tone like steel. "Then maybe you should remember who actually carried the family name when you walked away from it." His words cut deeper than I expected, and for a moment the air in the room thickened with silence. Clarissa sputtered, her voice rising. "You have no right to speak here. You are just staff." But the tremor in her tone betrayed her fear. She knew the tide was turning, and no amount of sneering could stop it. Margaret lifted her chin slowly, her voice trembling but clear. "He is right. Richard, you never cared about the farm. You abandoned it years ago. You cannot erase that truth, no matter how much you shout." The room had shifted. For the first time, my father looked smaller, the weight of so many eyes pressing down on him. He glanced around, his face flushed red, his hands tightening around his glass. "Enough of this nonsense," he barked, though the power in his voice faltered. I slid the folder onto the table, the papers whispering against the wood. Every eye followed the motion, the air heavy with anticipation. My father's breath hitched, his hand twitching toward it before he stopped himself. Clarissa leaned forward, her eyes wide. "What is that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I did not answer yet. I let the silence stretch, let them squirm under the weight of their own doubt. Then I spoke, my voice even. "Proof." My father scoffed, though it sounded forced. "Proof of what?" "That you are a stubborn child clinging to dirt." I met his eyes, unblinking. "Proof that you cannot sell what you do not own." A collective gasp rippled through the diners around us. Clarissa shook her head furiously, her hair falling into her face. "Liar," she hissed, though her voice wavered. Margaret pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, tears gathering in her eyes. She knew. She had always suspected, and now the truth was about to crack open. My father leaned back, forcing a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "You are bluffing. You always have been." He tried to sound confident, but his voice betrayed him. I laid my hand flat on the folder, steady as the land itself. "Try me." The storm inside the restaurant had broken wide open, the tension spilling into every corner. Diners leaned in close, their forks forgotten, their eyes wide. My father's empire of arrogance was crumbling, and he knew it. And as I sat there, my heart calm, the folder beneath my palm, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I was not waiting for their approval. I was not bracing for their ridicule. I was standing in the storm exactly where I was meant to be. The night was no longer theirs, it was mine. My father stared at me with narrowed eyes, the flush of anger creeping up his neck. But behind it I saw the flicker of doubt. Clarissa leaned forward, her fingers trembling as she tried to hold her glass steady. Margaret's hand hovered near her mouth, her eyes glistening with a kind of hope she had not dared to feel in years. The room around us was silent, except for the low hum of Christmas music, the kind that now felt jarringly out of place against the storm brewing at our table. I slid the folder closer, letting the papers brush against the wood. My father's jaw tightened. He wanted to grab it, tear it apart, dismiss it before anyone could see. But he did not move. His silence was more telling than any outburst. Clarissa broke first, her voice shrill. "She is bluffing, Dad. She always has. Do not let her rattle you." Her words rang out desperate, her eyes darting to the diners who were watching with unblinking stares. Ronan, still standing nearby, crossed his arms, his presence like a shadow anchoring me. He looked directly at my father, his voice calm. "She is not bluffing." He said nothing more, but his certainty cut through Clarissa's denial like a blade. I opened the folder just enough for the edge of the first page to show. My grandparents' signatures, neat and deliberate ink, faded but undeniable. The gasp that rose from Margaret was soft but sharp. She reached across the table, her fingers trembling. "I knew it," she whispered. "Evelyn and Samuel always knew you were the one, Manon." My father slammed his fist against the table, silverware rattling, wine sloshing over the rim of a glass. "Enough." His voice thundered through the room. "You think a piece of paper can erase everything I built?" His words shook with fury, but the crack in his confidence was spreading. I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. "It does not erase anything, Richard. It just shows the truth. You never built what you claim. You abandoned it. And they saw that. They put it in writing because they knew you would try to take what was never yours." Clarissa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, her face red with rage. "How dare you?" she spat. "You think you can humiliate us like this? In front of everyone?" She gestured wildly at the other tables, at the faces turned toward us. But before she could say more, another voice rose from the back of the room. A voice warm, steady, and clear. "Your grandparents told me the same thing years ago, Manon." I turned and saw Pastor Lewis, his silver hair catching the glow of the lights as he stepped forward. He had been their closest friend, the one who blessed the farm every spring. His eyes locked on mine, filled with quiet pride. "They wanted the farm in your hands, not his. They said you were the only one willing to get your boots dirty, the only one willing to honor what it stood for." The air thickened with the weight of his words. Clarissa's face paled, her fury faltering. My father shook his head violently, his voice cracking. "Lies, all of it." He looked around, searching for allies, but the room was against him now. Diners whispered, heads shaking, eyes narrowing at the man who had mocked his own daughter while stealing her inheritance. I pushed the folder fully onto the table, sliding it across the polished wood until it rested in the center, in plain sight. I flipped the page open, revealing the notarized seal. The clauses Jacob had explained to me in that dimly lit office. The trust, the conditions, the signatures. My father's hand twitched, but he did not reach for it. He could not. Everyone had seen. Everyone knew. Margaret pressed her palms flat against the table, her voice stronger now. "Richard, stop this before you destroy yourself completely." Her eyes filled with tears, but her tone was firm. "You cannot win this. Not against her. Not against the truth." Clarissa looked at her desperately, her voice breaking. "Aunt Margaret, you are supposed to be on our side." Margaret turned her gaze to me, then back to Clarissa. "I am on the side of what is right." My chest swelled with a mix of grief and vindication. For years, I had carried the weight of silence, the sting of their ridicule. And now, here it was breaking apart in front of me, their empire of arrogance collapsing under the truth. My father stood slowly, his chair scraping back. His face was red, his fists clenched. "You think this is over?" he growled. "You think a paper and some sentimental fools can stop me?" His voice lowered to a venomous whisper. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." But I did not flinch. I met his eyes, unyielding. "You have no idea what I am holding." The storm outside battered harder against the windows, the howl of wind filling the silence that followed. Clarissa's breathing came in sharp gasps, her hands trembling against the back of her chair. Margaret wept softly, her tears falling into her lap, not from sorrow but from release. Pastor Lewis placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice low but steady. "You are not alone, Manon, you never were." I closed the folder, gently sliding it back toward me. The proof had been shown. The whispers had begun. The tide had turned. But my father was not done yet. His pride would not let him fall quietly. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with venom, his eyes locked on me. This is not the end. I lifted my chin, my voice clear. No, it is the beginning. And as I spoke, the room seemed to exhale, the storm inside breaking wide open. The beginning came faster than I expected. The very next morning, Jacob called me, his voice sharp with urgency. The court filings had gone through. My father had tried to contest the trust overnight, sneaking papers through a different firm. It was desperate, sloppy, but enough to force a hearing. I listened in silence, my hand pressed against the kitchen counter, the smell of strong coffee filling the air as the winter sun spilled weak light over the fields. Jacob promised he would meet me downtown by 10, armed with the documents we needed. When I walked into the courthouse, the hallways were already buzzing. People rushed with files, shoes clicking on the marble floors, their faces drawn with stress. My father stood near the end of the corridor with Clarissa at his side. He wore a navy suit, his tie pulled too tight, the skin of his neck blotchy. Clarissa clutched her phone, whispering frantically into it, her eyes darting to me as I approached. Margaret was already inside the courtroom, sitting quietly with her hands folded in her lap. She looked older than I remembered the night before, her eyes tired but determined. She gave me a nod, small but steady. Jacob stepped to my side, his leather briefcase heavy in his hand, his presence grounding me. The hearing was called quickly, the judge entering with a stern face, glasses perched low on his nose. He wasted no time, his voice echoing through the chamber. Mr. Campo, you are contesting the Campo Trust, established in 1989, amended in 2014. Is that correct? My father stood, his voice booming with forced confidence. That is correct, Your Honor. My daughter is manipulating old documents to steal what rightfully belongs to me. Jacob rose calmly, his voice measured. With respect, Your Honor, my client is the sole beneficiary under the terms established by her grandparents, Evelyn and Samuel Campo. The documents are notarized, witnessed, and updated. We have bank records, correspondence, and multiple testimonies confirming intent. The judge turned his gaze on my father. Do you have evidence that contradicts these documents? My father faltered for the first time. His jaw worked, his eyes darted, but he had nothing. Clarissa shot me a glare, her lips pressed tight, her hands fidgeting with her phone like it could rescue her. The judge sighed, his gavel tapping lightly. Then the trust stands unless you can provide verifiable counter-evidence. I suggest you think carefully before wasting this court's time further. The blow landed heavier than any punch. My father's face drained of color, his shoulders sagging. Clarissa looked like she might faint, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The room buzzed with murmurs, reporters shifting to scribble notes. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, my heart pounding, steady but strong. After the hearing, Margaret walked out with me, her voice low. I knew it would come to this, she said, her eyes glistening. They mocked you because they feared you, and now they fear losing everything. I touched her arm gently. Thank you for standing with me. Her lips trembled into a faint smile. I stood with the truth. That is all. Outside, snow fell in light flakes, the cold air sharp against my skin. Reporters rushed forward, microphones extended, cameras flashing. Miss Campo, is it true you control the farm trust now? What will you do with the land? I kept walking, Jacob shielding me from the crush, my boots crunching against the icy sidewalk. At home that evening, I sat at the kitchen table, the old wooden surface scarred from years of use. The folder lay open in front of me, the trust papers spread across it. My father's threats echoed in my head, his venomous whisper that it was not the end. Clarissa's glare lingered, too sharp as broken glass. I knew they would not walk away quietly. The phone rang just after 9. I let it go to voicemail, the voice that followed curling through the room. It was my father. His tone was calmer now, almost cold. You think you won today, Manon, but this land is cursed. It destroyed me, and it will destroy you too. His words ended with a click. I sat still, the silence pressing heavy. For a moment, the weight of it all nearly broke me. But then I thought of Evelyn and Samuel, of their hands guiding mine as a child through the soil, their laughter in the fields, their stories at the kitchen table. This was not a curse, it was a legacy, and I would protect it. The days that followed were relentless. My father tried every tactic. He sent letters through lawyers, he spread rumors in town. He tried to turn neighbors against me. Clarissa fueled the fire, calling me ungrateful, parading through church services with her chin high, pretending nothing had happened. But the whispers followed her, and the eyes that once admired her began to turn away. One evening, Margaret came by with old boxes she had kept in her attic. Inside were letters from my grandparents, photographs, journals. She handed me one in particular, its pages yellowed. They wrote about you, she said softly. About how you were the only one who came back to help with the harvest, the only one who cared when the barn roof leaked. They knew long before anyone else. I read the words late into the night, tears streaming down my face. Every line was a reminder that I was not fighting alone, that I had been chosen not out of pity, but out of love and trust. The turning point came when Jacob called with new information. The farm had not only been preserved in the trust, but tied to several land deals my father had hidden. He had used the family name to secure loans, leaving unpaid debts buried under layers of paperwork. If those came to light, it would not only bankrupt him but expose years of deceit. I listened carefully, the fire inside me steady. Bring it to light, Jacob. Every last piece. He hesitated, his voice low. It will ruin him, Manon. Completely. I closed my eyes, seeing my father's sneer, hearing Clarissa's cruel laughter, feeling the sting of every insult. Let it. That night, as snow piled against the windows, I stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at the fields. The moonlight cast a silver glow over the land, the same land my grandparents had fought to keep alive. My reflection stared back in the glass, not the broken girl they once mocked, but a woman ready to finish what had begun. The storm was not over. It was a building, and I would be ready when it broke. The storm broke on the morning of the final hearing. Snow blanketed the streets, and the courthouse steps were slick with ice. As I walked up with Jacob beside me, my boots crunched. My breath hung in the air, but my heart was steady. Inside the courtroom filled with people, neighbors and reporters packed shoulder to shoulder, my father sat stiff in his chair, his face pale, his eyes darting from me to Jacob. Clarissa sat next to him, her lips pressed thin, her fingers tapping nervously against her phone. The judge entered, his robe swaying as he took his seat. He cleared his throat, his voice carrying over the murmurs. We are here to address outstanding debts tied to the Campo name and the validity of the trust. The documents before me are extensive. I will hear both sides one final time. Jacob rose first, calm and firm. Your Honor, the evidence shows that Richard Campo leveraged the family farm to secure personal loans, defaulted on several payments, and attempted to conceal the debts under shell accounts. These actions were done without the knowledge or consent of the beneficiaries. We have bank records, sworn testimony, and notarized letters. My client, Manon Campo, is the sole beneficiary of the trust established by her grandparents. She is not responsible for his personal debts. My father jumped to his feet, his voice booming. Lies, all of it. That land was mine. She stole it. He jabbed his finger toward me, his face red with rage. She is trying to ruin me, to humiliate me. The judge lifted a hand, silencing him. Do you have verifiable evidence that contradicts these claims? He froze. His mouth opened and closed, but nothing came. Clarissa leaned toward him, whispering frantically, but her words were swallowed by the silence. The judge sighed, his gavel tapping once. Then the court recognizes the validity of the Campo Trust. All assets are to be transferred under the sole authority of Manon Campo. Outstanding debts tied to Richard Campo will remain his responsibility alone. The words struck like lightning. My father's face was drained of color. Clarissa gasped, her hands trembling, her phone clattering onto the table. Margaret covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. The gallery erupted in murmurs, reporters scribbling furiously. I sat still, my body trembling not with fear but with release. Years of mockery, years of being told I was nothing shattered in that moment. I felt my grandparents with me, their hands steady on my shoulders, their voices whispering through time. After the hearing ended, my father stormed out, Clarissa chasing after him. Reporters tried to follow, but the snow swallowed them outside. Margaret stayed, her eyes locked on me. You did it, she whispered. Her voice broke as she reached for my hand. You saved the name, the land, everything they hoped you would. I squeezed her hand, my throat tight. I just did what they asked of me. Pastor Lewis approached, his face warm, his hand resting on my arm. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones closest to home, he said softly. You fought with the truth, that is why you won. That night I walked to the farm alone. The snow lay heavy across the fields, glistening under the moonlight. The barn loomed ahead, sturdy despite the years, and the old farmhouse glowed with a soft light. I breathed in the cold air, the silence wrapping around me. This land was no longer a burden. It was mine. It was home. I thought of my father's words, his threats, his sneers. I thought of Clarissa's cruel laughter at the Christmas table. And I thought of the truth that had finally come to light. They had mocked me for being filthy, for smelling of dirt and sweat, for not belonging. But it was that very dirt that sweat, that loyalty to the land that had secured everything. I paused by the fence, my hands resting on the cold wood. For years I had carried their insults like stones in my pockets, weighing me down. Tonight I let them fall. I was free. Inside the house I opened one of my grandparents' journals. The words leapt from the page, written in my grandmother's neat script. The farm belongs to the one who loves it most. not to the loudest voice or the cruelest hand, but to the one willing to protect it. I closed the book gently, my heart swelling. The legacy was mine to carry, but it was more than money or land. It was dignity, it was justice, it was the proof that kindness and perseverance mattered more than pride or cruelty. I looked out the window once more, the snow still falling, the land stretching out before me. I knew the battles ahead would not be easy, but I was ready. For the first time, I felt whole. If you have ever faced a family who mocked you, if you have ever been told you were not enough, I hope my story reminds you that truth and resilience can carry you through. Have you ever had to stand up to someone in your own family who tried to take away what was rightfully yours? I would love to hear your thoughts, your experiences, and your victories. Please share them with me, and if this story touched you, I invite you to stay with me for more.